So we're going to take a few minutes in this next section and examine children's writing through a developmental lens. To do this, we're going to look at samples from a number of young people from kindergarten through approximately second grade level. I want to distinguish for a minute between the developmental stages in children's writing and the developmental stages in spelling. While these two things are interrelated, they are not the same thing. And I will provide the parallel so that you understand the language of children's developmental spelling, looking first at Richard Gentry's work that's based on Glenda Blissick's work, Genius at Work. But for the most part, we're going to be focusing on children's writing development, specifically their fluency. Fluency in relation to writing means something very different than fluency in relation to children's reading. We've come to see fluency as speed in reading. In writing, it has nothing to do with speed. It has to do with the degree to which they can communicate anything that they want to communicate, utilizing written symbols for that purpose. So fluency is distinct from conventionality. Conventions are actually the language conventions that we utilize within writing. Things like punctuation and grammar and conventional spelling are examples of conventions. And so those are the only two domains right now that I'm going to distinguish between as we're examining the developmental stages of children's writing. There are three broad phases in writing development that I want you to be aware of. The first one is emerging literacy. Emerging literacy moves from a completely unreadable text to a highly sophisticated text that actually presents a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, multiple sentences being presented as a story. Following the emerging literacy phase, which has three distinct stages, there's the developing fluency stage. This is a stage where students might stay for quite some time. Hopefully, they achieve the developing fluency stage somewhere at the end of kindergarten, perhaps the beginning of first grade, and they work their way through to become increasingly fluent in their writing, increasingly capable of expressing anything that they want to say. This stage is followed by the stage that students stay in throughout most of grade school, and frankly, that I'm still in as an adult. That is conscious control. Our goal is for students to gain conscious control of their writing and to be able to utilize words and language to elicit thoughts, ideas, and emotions on the part of their audience, to be able to fulfill their intended purpose on any topic that they're knowledgeable about or that they're researching. That's the goal. And that is what happens in the conscious control phase. These can start by being very rough, but also simultaneously, they all have a sparkle to them that occurs in the conscious control phase. When you get to the final stage of conscious control, the texts are really, can be quite eloquent and sometimes very moving. So that's a rough overview of three phases of writing development: emerging literacy, which will be our focus for today, developing fluency, and conscious control. At the very beginning of the emerging literacy phase, you find children doing something that all children do, exploring with pens and paper, and frequently this is in the form of scribbling. Sometimes the scribbling is accompanied by images. For example, this image of a young child to lead a cat with a leash, I believe. Anyway, the child basically has scribbled his story and then drawn an illustration to go with that story. When the sophisticated teacher asks the child about his writing, the child will actually tell the story, and sometimes will even point to those scribbles, point to those squiggles, and retell the story. They know that it's fixed in time, and they know that those squiggles they often know that those squiggles represent the story. So this is a classic example of the emerging literacy phase at phase one. And if a literate adult can read anything within this text, it is not emerging literacy phase stage one. In spelling, the previous example would have been actually called pre-communicative. And this next example would also be pre-communicative because I cannot actually read the story, but we know clearly by looking at this example what the child is trying to do. He or she knows that the alphabet is an important carrier of meaning and has copied that alphabet representing or standing in for the story, while the story is actually being told through the illustrations or the pictures that the child has created. It's a classic example again of the emerging literacy phase and stage 1 within that phase. In this sample, the child's taken just one letter form and repeated it many times, but then you begin to see some rather sophisticated introduction of new letters. And those new letters represent something pretty important in this phase. I wouldn't call this yet semi-phonetic in relation to spelling, but and nor does it actually go to stage 2 of the emerging literacy phase of children's development, but this is a distinct indicator of development. And this child wrote this moving from left to right and from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. And as a consequence of that, we know that there are certain concepts about print in play, and those are reading foundation skills being developed through the writing process. Here's an example of the semi-phonetic phase, and I would actually suggest that it may be moving into the phonetic phase in spelling, and it's also an example of emerging literacy phase, the emerging literacy phase, stage 3. The first sentence of this young writer's work is, "It was blue." I'm not sure what the child was referring to, and I cannot decipher what comes after it, but I do clearly recognize that there is one single original sentence being presented in this text, and that is the third stage of the emerging literacy phase of children's writing. Here's another example at the same stage. The child's drawn a circle and has labeled it clearly circle, and if it only was that, it would be stage 2 of emerging literacy, which is word writing or labeling. But instead, this child has added a description. "My circle is round," a single sentence that describes what the child has done. And that elevates this to the emerging literacy phase, stage 3. Here's a classic example of the emerging literacy phase, stage 3, which is a single original sentence. That sentence is being presented as a story. "I played basketball at school." And another example, "Me and Amanda went to the hotel and we got in the pool." If we were examining these last two examples through the lens of developmental spelling, we would have moved from the phonetic to the transitional stage, with this second one being in the transitional stage. Here's another example of a child potentially in the transitional stage and doing an excellent job of representing the sounds in a complex story about her hamster. "Me and the hamster. I had a hamster. She is black and white. She is gift. She is a good girl. I could not find her. I find her under my bed." This is now a complete story with multiple sentences or several distinct related sentences, and as a consequence, it's in the developing fluency phase. That is stage 4 on the holistic developmental writing scale. Another example of stage 4 writing. "My mom's car window got broken. It made her sad. The police came to investigate." If we look at this through the lens of developmental spelling, again by J. Richard Gentry, we're looking at a transitional text. Children write most elaborately about the things that they really care about. Here's something this little boy really cared about. "I really like my sister's Mario. When my sister plays Mario, she gets to the first level, but I got to the 6th level. My sister likes Mario, so do I." Children frequently will write about their everyday routines. Here's a classic one. "Every night I have to get my teddy bear situated. If I didn't, I get frustrated. Then I pull the covers over my head. Then I go to sleep. My teddy bear's name is B. I cannot sleep without him. He is very old. B is brown. I love him. The previous example about the teddy bear is a classic example of the developing fluency phase where the child has moved on to a level 5 and is approaching a level 6, a simple narrative. I need you to know that it's not flooded with superfluous detail, which is the classic level 6. This next one is a level 5 as well. My cats are tiger cats. My cats are very sweet. Their names are Laxi and Nikki. They are both girls. They are very, very, very good. Before we got them, we had 2 different cats, and their names were Nikki and Clover. Clover was a boy, and Nikki was a girl. They were very good, too. And this next one, again, Developing Fluency Phase 5, authored by a 2nd grader. Dear Diary, I'm going to Polly's house to have Thanksgiving. I made 2 pies. One was an apple pie and the other was a pumpkin pie. I made these pies because I wanted to impress Polly. I hope she likes my pies. It's a classic example of the developing fluency phase at level 5, where there's a simple narrative or story, but there's some detail, some additional personal reflection. It's more than a simple statement of beginning, middle, and end. I particularly like the way this young author uses the word impress. Our final example is a child reading about a pet. My lizard. I got a very good lizard. I got him at Pet Shop and he was $30. I like my lizard a whole lot. My lizard is green, red, black color. He is cool. His name is Joan. I picked it out. I like my lizard's name a lot. My lizard ate something, fruit, and other little stuff. My lizard lives in a cage with a lamp and food. Me and my lizard had really fun times together. My lizard is the coolest lizard I ever had. The end.